HOA, Karen burned my cornfield and smiled. She had no idea the camera was already recording everything. The flames were still moving through my corn when she folded her arms, looked directly at me across the fence, and smiled. "Burn it all," she said, loud enough for the entire road to hear. "Now maybe you will learn not to break HOA rules." I stood at the edge of the field with heat hitting my face, watching 6 months of work turn into black smoke, and I said nothing, because Karen had just made 2 enormous mistakes. She did not know about the first one yet, and the second one was already driving down the road. The smell of burned corn moved across the neighborhood in a slow wave. A handful of neighbors had come outside and were standing on their porches, watching. Some were whispering. Several had their phones raised, and right in the middle of all of it stood Karen, the self-appointed president of the HOA, leaning against my fence post like she had just won something. She had called the fire department herself, but not to save anything. I found out later what she had told the dispatcher. "No rush," she had said. "It is just a nuisance farm." A nuisance farm. That is what she called the land my father left me. The same land that had existed for decades before her perfectly arranged HOA neighborhood was built on the property next door. I stepped closer to the fence between us and asked her directly if she had done this. She tilted her head slightly, the way someone does when they are explaining something obvious to a person they consider beneath their patience. She told me I had violated community standards, that the HOA had sent warnings, that this was the consequence of ignoring them. I told her calmly that the HOA had zero legal authority over my land. She laughed and said everything here belonged to the community now. One of the neighbors standing behind her said quietly that maybe she should stop. She spun around immediately and told him to stay out of it. Then she pointed back at me like a prosecutor addressing a jury and announced that I had refused to remove the ugly farm, so she had handled it herself. Behind her, another section of corn collapsed into the flames with a sharp crack. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I did not check it yet. Karen leaned against the fence post with her arms crossed like the matter was already settled. She told me I should thank her, that my property value might finally recover now that the field was gone. Property value. That was the word she kept returning to. Not the crop, not the 6 months of work, not the fact that she had just set fire to land that legally was not hers to touch. Just property value. As though that phrase was a complete justification for everything she had done in the past 20 minutes. One of the firefighters walked over and asked if I had started the fire. Before I could answer, Karen stepped in front of me and said confidently that I had been refusing HOA compliance for months, and that the fire department should be looking at me. The firefighter looked at me. I shook my head slowly. Karen told me to prove it. I did not respond immediately. I looked at the burning field, at the black smoke rising over the row of expensive houses behind her. Then my phone buzzed again. I pulled it out and read the message. 3 words. Insurance investigator arriving. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked at Karen, with an expression that must have shifted slightly because she noticed it immediately. She laughed and asked if I was calling a lawyer. I told her no. She raised an eyebrow and asked what I was doing then. I looked back at the burning crop for a moment and then said, "I was just wondering something." She asked what I said. I was wondering if she knew how expensive corn insurance becomes when someone commits arson. Her smile did not disappear immediately, but something behind it moved. She recovered quickly and told me, "Good luck proving anything." I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I did not panic, because the first mistake she had made was assuming my land fell under her authority. The second mistake had just turned onto the dirt road beside my field and was rolling toward us in a black SUV. 2 people stepped out, a man in a suit and a woman carrying a tablet. Karen looked at them with her arms still crossed and asked who they were. The man walked toward us, looked at the burned field, then at Karen, then at me, and asked if I was Mr. Carter. I told him yes. He introduced himself as Daniel Brooks from Midwest Agricultural Insurance and told me they had received an emergency alert from my field sensors about a potential arson event. Karen repeated the word arson with a short laugh, like it was a punchline that had not landed correctly. Daniel looked around the field without reacting to her and then pointed toward a small metal pole standing near the corner near the fence line. Karen had not noticed it before. She noticed it now. He explained that the agricultural protection system on that pole recorded heat spikes, motion, and continuous video. The woman beside him tapped her tablet and said the footage had begun recording approximately 12 minutes before the fire started. Karen's smile disappeared. The neighbors behind her leaned forward. Several phones were still raised and recording from the porches across the road. Daniel looked at me and confirmed the insured field under my policy number. I told him yes. He looked down at his tablet and then back at Karen and said the crop was insured for $2 million. Karen's mouth opened. She said that was ridiculous, that it was just corn. Daniel shook his head and said, the neighbors looked at each other. Karen's eyes moved back to me slowly, for the first time since the fire had started. Something in her expression had shifted from confidence into something closer to calculation. I said we should probably watch the footage. She laughed again, but it sounded different this time. Forced. The woman with the tablet tapped the screen and turned it around. The video showed my cornfield swaying normally in the wind. Quiet, ordinary. Then a white SUV pulled up near the fence. A few neighbors made quiet sounds. Karen's face went stiff. She said quickly that it did not prove anything. The video continued. The car door opened. Karen stepped out clearly. She walked toward the fence, looking left and right, like she was checking whether anyone was watching. The woman paused the video. The entire road went silent. Daniel looked up and asked Karen if she would like him to continue. She crossed her arms and said the footage could have been edited, that anyone could fake a video. Daniel did not argue. He simply nodded to the woman and the video resumed. Karen was shown on screen pouring something from a clear plastic container along the dry edge of the field. Then she tossed something small into the corn rows. 3 seconds later, there was a flash and fire spread instantly across the dry leaves and stalks. Someone behind her whispered something under their breath. Karen said quietly, that was not what it looked like. But the video was not finished. Because right before she walked back to her SUV, Karen turned directly toward the camera pole and waved, like she had just won something. Like she was celebrating. The tablet went quiet. Nobody on that road said a single word for several seconds. Then Karen exploded. She said the camera was illegal, that you could not record people that way. Daniel told her calmly that it was installed on private agricultural land. She said the land was part of the community zone. I pulled a folded document from my pocket, the original county land survey stamped decades before the HOA existed, and handed it to Daniel. He looked it over and confirmed that the property predated the HOA by 43 years. Karen's jaw tightened. She said the neighborhood had voted replete. Daniel replied that votes did not override property law. The neighbors behind her were whispering again. One of them said quietly that she might be in serious trouble. She spun around and told everyone to stop talking. Then she turned back to me and asked if I thought any of this scared her. I told her I was not trying to scare her. Daniel cleared his throat and said there was also the matter of insurance liability. Karen told him he was not getting $2 million for burned corn. Daniel looked at her carefully and said, actually, I would. Then he explained that the crop was not ordinary livestock corn. Karen frowned and asked what it was for. I let a small pause sit in the air before I answered. It was a government agricultural research crop. The entire group went quiet at once. Karen laughed nervously. Daniel did not laugh. He opened another document on the tablet and said the crop had been contracted through a federal research program. Karen's face began losing color. Daniel continued and said that destroying it was not just an insurance matter. It could be classified as federal agricultural sabotage. Karen's lips parted. For the first time since she had smiled at me across the burning field, she had absolutely nothing to say. And that was the moment a police cruiser turned slowly onto the dirt road and rolled toward us over the gravel. Karen straightened up instantly when she saw the cruiser. Her confidence seemed to reset. She said finally, and stepped toward the officer before he had finished parking. She started to tell him that I had started the fire and that I had been violating HOA rules for months. The officer stepped out, raised one hand before she could finish, and looked around at the scene first. The burned field, the neighbors filming from porches, the two insurance investigators, the tablet still showing a paused frame of Karen with a container in her hands. Daniel told the officer they had video footage of the incident. Karen spun toward him and said he did not get to speak. The officer told her firmly to step back. The woman with the tablet pressed play. The officer watched the entire video from beginning to end without saying a word. When it finished, he looked up slowly and directly at Karen. Her voice came out thinner than before. She said it was not what it looked like. The officer asked her what it looked like then. She swallowed and said she had been testing the soil. A few neighbors laughed quietly. The officer looked back at the screen and asked if she had been testing the soil with gasoline. Karen's mouth opened and closed without producing any sound. Daniel told the officer the field was insured under a $2 million agricultural research contract. Karen turned toward him and told him to stop saying that number. Daniel continued and explained the federal hybrid yield research program. The officer's expression changed slightly at the word federal. Karen shook her head quickly and said, "It was just corn." I said, "Not exactly." She glared at me and said I was making the situation bigger than it was. I looked at the burned rose and told her quietly that she had done that herself when she lit the match. The officer turned to Karen and told her to turn around. She blinked. He repeated himself. Her voice rose immediately. She said he was arresting the wrong person. He stayed completely calm and said it again. She told him he did not understand who she was, that she was the HOA president, that she managed the entire community. He did not react. He said, "Turn around one more time," and reached for his handcuffs. Karen stepped back, and her voice went fast and high. She said her lawyer would destroy the case, that this was harassment, that he could not arrest her over corn. The officer said quietly that this was not about corn anymore. She froze and asked what he meant. Daniel looked down at his tablet again and said there was one more issue. Karen stared at him. He told her the field sensors had detected a second vehicle near the property before the fire started. Karen frowned and said she did not know anything about a second vehicle. The woman with the tablet zoomed the footage slowly. Another car appeared in the corner of the frame, parked further down the road, visible before Karen had even arrived. The officer leaned forward to look. One of the neighbors on the porch made a sharp sound and said they recognized it. Karen spun toward them. The neighbor pointed slowly toward the large house at the corner of the HOA street. That was Tom Bradley's car. Karen's eyes went wide and her face went completely still. The officer looked at the plate on the screen, looked at the house at the corner, and then looked at Karen with an expression that said this situation had just grown significantly larger than a burned cornfield. Karen stood between the smoking rose and the gathering neighbors and the insurance investigator and the officer, and for the first time since she had folded her arms and smiled at me across the fence, she understood exactly what she had walked into. The field was already gone, but everything she was about to lose was still standing right in front of her, waiting for the next step to begin.